When you hear the word family, what comes to mind? For a lot of us, it's comfort, it's safety. But for so many others, it's a lot more complicated. The truth is, our childhood leaves this lasting imprint on who we become, and a lot of the time, we don't even fully understand how. So today, we're going to dive into some of those common and often hidden characteristics of troubled family dynamics, drawing from the amazing work of Dr. Lane Lasater. I think this quote from Peter Levine just perfectly sets the stage for what we're talking about. The whole point here isn't to point fingers or assign blame. It's about building understanding. It's this recognition that, yeah, while trauma is a reality for so many, it absolutely does not have to define the rest of our lives. Okay, so think about family troubles like an iceberg. The real damage, the stuff that really gets you, isn't always the big, obvious, dramatic events you can see above the water. Nope. It's what's happening just below the surface, that constant feeling of insecurity, the emotional distance. And these hidden problems are so damaging because as a kid, you just feel that something is deeply wrong, but you have no clear event, no big thing to explain why you feel so bad. And that feeling of hidden distress, well, it often comes from our very first major characteristic, an unpredictable home life, where emotional whiplash just becomes the norm. So right at the heart of this unpredictability are the relationships themselves. One minute things can be warm and loving, and the next they're hostile and cold, all in an instant. For a child, living with that constant emotional flux makes it pretty much impossible to build any kind of stable sense of security. And it's not just that you learn not to trust others, you actually learn not to trust your own feelings. Just look at these two columns. On one side, you have all this friendliness, affection, closeness. On the other, hostility, criticism, coldness. Now, imagine you're a kid and the emotional forecast in your house can change from one column to the other with absolutely no warning. It's so disorienting, and it leaves you constantly on edge. Let's make this real with Stephanie's story. Her mom's affection was already a total roller coaster, but it got even more complicated. Her mother was actually jealous of her own husband's love for Stephanie. So to keep the peace, Stephanie learned she had to hide her feelings for her own dad. But then, when he eventually pulled away because of that distance, she was left feeling completely abandoned by both of them. This kind of constant instability, it often forces children to step into roles they were never, ever meant to play. And that brings us to our second point, this incredibly heavy burden of responsibility that gets placed on kids, forcing them to become adults way too soon. Oh man, this is such a classic and truly heartbreaking dynamic. Kids get pulled into these adult roles that they are just not equipped to handle. I mean, they don't have the maturity to be their parent's counselor or to be an emotional stand-in for a spouse. And yet, they carry that weight and they really, really try their best to fix things. This image just captures that experience perfectly, doesn't it? The child is like an air traffic controller, frantically trying to keep their parents, mom and dad, from crashing into each other. They're forced to intervene in this incredibly complex adult situation without any training, without any support, just totally lost. And the consequences? Well, they're serious. Being forced into these roles totally interrupts the simple, necessary job of just being a kid. It creates these deep-seated feelings of anxiety and inadequacy because, let's face it, they can never actually fix the adult problems. And maybe worst of all, it robs them of the chance to develop their own sense of who they are. Joshua's story is a perfect example of this. His father was away a lot for work, so he became his mom's go-to emotional support system. She leaned on him to make up for the intimacy that was missing in her marriage. But in doing so, she also enabled his irresponsibility, which then, of course, drew intense criticism from his dad when he was home, pushing him even further away from the one person he needed for guidance. Now, this burden of responsibility is almost always carried in complete silence, within a very specific atmosphere. And that brings us to our third section, the unspoken rules that govern a house of secrets. Dr. Claudia Black identified these 3 foundational unspoken rules that are so common in troubled families. Don't talk about the problems. Don't trust anyone inside or outside the family with what's really going on. And maybe the most important one, don't feel your own emotions because they're seen as inconvenient or even threatening to the family system. So what happens when you live by these rules? Well, the result is this profound and really painful isolation. You learn very early on not to talk about what's really happening. You learn not to trust anyone with your true experience. And you certainly learn not to show your real feelings. You end up completely alone with your distress, even when you're surrounded by your family. Michael's family looked perfect from the outside. They were seen as a super family in their community. But behind that perfect facade, his mother was struggling with alcoholism, and his father was suicidal. The family's public image was protected by this massive wall of secrets. So you have to ask, how could Michael ever feel safe enough to share his own truth, that he was transgender? He was terrified it would just be seen as one more flaw, one more secret to be hidden away. And inside this house of secrets, hidden abuse often thrives. And it's not always obvious. It can be the chilling effect of a hostile silence. It can be the constant nagging put-downs and sarcasm. It can be name-calling and humiliation, or just outright intimidation. These things are every bit as damaging as any physical blow. So, we've seen how unpredictability, premature responsibility, and this culture of secrecy create such a toxic environment. But what happens when these problems start to overlap and get amplified by other major crises? Right? It's so important to get this. These characteristics, they rarely appear one at a time. More often than not, they coexist and they feed into and amplify one another. What this does is it creates multiple overlapping layers of trauma for a child to try and navigate all at once. And here are some of the most significant things that can amplify the trauma. We're talking about things like parental addiction, abandonment, divorce, or the death of a parent, overt physical or verbal violence, even sexual boundary violations. And we also have to acknowledge the larger systemic issues, like institutional racism, which add this other immense layer of stress and trauma onto family life. And let's be really clear about this. Parental addiction acts like a powerful accelerant. It basically pours gasoline on every single other issue we've discussed. The unpredictability, the secrets, the misplaced responsibility. Addiction just makes all of it so much more intense and so much more destructive. So why does all of this matter? What's the big takeaway here? Well, it's because these experiences don't just stay in childhood. As Dr. Lasater explains, they form the very first roadmaps we are given. These experiences teach us what to expect from relationships, how we should handle our emotions, and what our place is in the world. And we carry these maps with us right into adulthood. And that leaves us with a really vital question for all of us. How do these early roadmaps, the ones drawn for us in childhood, continue to shape the adults we become? Think about it. How does that first draft, drawn in the landscape of your own family, continue to guide, or maybe misguide, the person you are today?